of the bill. Minister.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman. It's a great pleasure to be here today to set out the clauses of this bill, starting with Clause 1. The Social Security Contributions and Benefits Act 1992, Mr. Chairman, sets out the earnings and profits on which employees, employers and self-employed are liable to pay national insurance contributions. Clause 1 introduces a new tax. Tax has been known as the Health and Social Care Levy and will be charged on the same basis as national insurance contributions. The levy will be set at 1.25% and will affect earnings from the 6th of April 2023 onwards. Where an individual or an employer is liable to a qualifying national insurance contribution, they will also be liable to the levy. The earnings and profits of those contributions are payable on this levy will also be payable on. The qualifying national insurance contributions in question are primary Class 1 NICs that employees pay on their earnings, secondary Class 1 NICs that employers pay on the earnings of their employees, Class A and Class 1A and Class 1B national insurance contributions that employers pay on benefits in kind received by their employees, and Class 4 NICs paid by the self-employed. Mr. Chairman, this new levy has been introduced to raise funds for health and social care, and it is only right, therefore, that those individuals of all ages who are able to pay should do so. Therefore, individuals over state pension age who would be liable to those contributions were they not exempt will be liable to this levy. I'm happy to.
If we're talking about an insurance system, can the government explain why they've ruled out state-sponsored insurance? I can understand why they can't rely entirely on private insurance because the risk is too great. But Dilnot originally came up with the idea that people could take out insurance when they retired. It would be a charge on their house, and they'd have to pay it back when they died on the basis of the value of their house. So I'm not asking for the government to accept these ideas now. I'm just saying that do they have an open mind? Are they prepared to look at it? Because this is a complicated matter. We want to have a real insurance system.
I think my honourable friend is. I thank him very much for his question. Of course, in a collective sense, this is a state insurance system because it is making long-term provision for catastrophic outcomes in people's health and social care. But the point he raises is an acute one. He will be aware that both the King's Fund and the House of Lords Economic Affairs Committee have looked at private insurance models and concluded that they have severe limitations that would not make them appropriate. Indeed, no country around the world has a purely private insurance model. It is certainly something that has been contemplated by Professor Dilnot and is compatible with the thrust of this legislation, that there should then arise a private insurance market now that some of these catastrophic risks have been removed from the calculus that individuals have to make about their own social care. And I hope that addresses the point that he raises. If I may say so, Mr. Chairman, just to resume, individuals over state pension age who would be liable to those contributions were they not exempt will be liable to this levy. This means that pensioners in work will now contribute 1.25% of their nickable earnings or profit to health and social care in the same way as working age employees and self-employed individuals. Clause 3 discusses in more detail how NICS legislation applies to this levy. However, Clause 1 also ensures that where an employer benefits from a zero rate of secondary Class 1 NICs, such as employers of under 21-year-olds or apprentices who are under 25 or veterans or employees in free ports, those earnings that are subject to the zero rate will not be liable to this levy. This ensures that businesses continue to invest in young people in developing strong skill sets and in those who have served this country. I therefore beg to move that Clause 1 stand part of the bill.
Very grateful to the Minister for giving way. As I understand it, it is the Government's wish that the social care levy would appear as a separately identified line item with that phrasing on a payslip. So can it also be clear on the payslip that it would only represent a small fraction of social care costs and a tiny fraction of health costs? Otherwise, it could be very misleading.
Well, I thank my friend for the question, and it's a very helpful suggestion. I don't think there will be any ambiguity about the language that's on the slip, but of course it may not be clear to people that that's not the totality of the funding that goes through government. And if I may, I'll take what he said as a suggestion and refer it to colleagues. Of course, as he'll be aware... I'm so sorry.
I'd just like to ask the Minister, as he has such responsibilities across the board, whether he's contemplated the question of public waste in the context of, for example, HS2, if we were to actually cut that back and actually do the kind of things in terms of waste generally throughout government, would that not be something which would be an enormously powerful message that would go out to the British people, that we're not just concentrating on this aspect of public expenditure, but also balancing it off by making real savings in areas where, for example, the Treasury, as he knows, or economic advisors have said that they put the second part, phase 2A of the HS2 legislation on red watch because it's so impossible to achieve its objectives.
Well, he's successfully dragooned a topic that has nothing to do with national insurance contributions or the levy into the debate. But let me reassure him that the Treasury exercises a hawk-like vigilance over, or seeks to exercise a hawk-like vigilance over all public spending. I don't think it would be appropriate to think in terms of the response to a pandemic that we've seen over the last 2 years as being characteristic of the Treasury's overall largesse. We look very closely at the spending on HS2, and it's the specific responsibility of my right honourable friend, the Chief Secretary, and one that I know he takes with great seriousness. If I may proceed a little, yes, of course, I'm happy to.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. The fact that the social care levy will be brought in, as I understand it, 2023 and not 2022, and that we are, in the interim, having to rely upon national insurance, suggests to me that creating it is involving quite a lot of work and therefore expense. So my question is, how much is it going to cost to introduce the levy beyond national insurance? Because based on that, one needs to make an assessment as to whether it's worthwhile putting the 1.25% on people past state retirement age or not. If it's costly, then don't do it and simply rely on national insurance contributions. And how much does he ally to that? How much does he think he's going to raise from people beyond state retirement age from the 1.25%?
Series of questions there. Of course, the pay slips that people are given will be generated by their own companies in the large part, and it's important therefore to think about not just changes that HMRC have to make, but also changes that need to be made by companies in order to be able to reflect this amendment to pay slips. In the case of HMRC, the government's just clarified in a letter to the Treasury Select Committee that although it's very early days, HMRC provisionally estimate the operational costs of implementing this at around the 50 to 60 million pound mark, which is not nothing, but is not substantial in the context of the overall amount to be raised. As regards the final point of his question, which I think was the amount that was attributed to the over 65s, one would expect that to be relatively modest because the number of qualifying people won't be enormous, and they have a very high, a genuinely high propensity to manage their work-life balance, and therefore they may be affected by there may be a dynamic effect from the levy. I'm not aware that we've put that number into the public domain, but if we have it, I'll see if we can publish it. Probably, I would say at the future fiscal event budget or thereafter.
Can I just before Dr. Morrison does his intervention, can I ask the Minister please to face the microphone, because otherwise they won't be able to hear the responses. I found it difficult.
I do apologise. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologise for that.
Dr. Morrison, grateful, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify my thinking on this matter, is that 50 to 60 million a one-off, or is that a recurring feature?
I think it's the set-up costs, although it may be incurred over more than 1 year. But as I say, it's a very preliminary number that we've tried to get for purposes of responding to the Treasury Committee's inquiry. Yes, of course, I'm happy to give way.
To him, he talked then about the advantages of having clarity on the payslip about what people are paying for the health and social care levy. Has he thought about combining the existing national insurance contributions that are allocated direct to the NHS and don't go into the National Insurance Contributions Fund? They're around, I think, £26 billion each year. That would effectively treble the amount of money in the levy and be much clearer for people that they are paying all that towards the health system, rather than having two different taxes doing exactly the same thing in very, very slightly different ways.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for the point he makes, and of course he rightly points out that there is an element of NIC's payments which is already hypothecated, something that's sometimes forgotten by people who've been concerned about the hypothecation in the levy. If I may, what I'll take is his remarks as a suggestion, and we'll reflect on that further. But I thank him very much for it, and I recognise his expertise in this area, and so I'm grateful for the intervention. If I may, I'm going to make a little bit more progress, and then to the Honourable Gentleman, and then I'm happy to take a further intervention. Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'd like to address, as it happens serendipitously, the amendment tabled by my honourable friend, the member for Amber Valley. This amendment asks that HMRC should publish a forecast of the estimated costs of collecting the levy. The published tax information impact note sets out clearly the operational costs of the levy are being quantified, and we will publish the estimates, and I've given a preliminary indication, but we will publish the final estimates before the levy comes into effect in April 2022, and therefore this amendment, I would suggest, is not necessary, and I would ask or consider my friend the honourable member to consider withdrawing his amendment for the reason I've outlined. I'm happy to take intervention.
Thank you very much. Building on the right honourable member for Wokingham's point, isn't one of the advantages of having a separate health and social care levy that we can explain more clearly as people's representatives that if you want to put more money into a system, it has to be paid for? And isn't that advantage ultimately one that will help connect people to where their money goes and therefore enrich the debate?
Well, I think it will, and that's why the government's decided to make this rather important change. But it may well be, it's possible that this is not the end of the story, and that in due course the desire for clarity about how money is spent, which is expressed elsewhere in the tax system, will manifest itself in other ways. I don't want to speculate on how it is, but the point he makes, which is about the importance of accountability, clarity, and perspicuity as to how money is spent, I think is a very important one.
On that point,
yes, of course.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. Wouldn't it be even simpler and more transparent if we had a social care levy standing on its own? And is it not the case that the government doesn't want to have a social care levy on its own because it knows that if it became transparent about that, it would be obvious that we were reneging on our manifesto commitments of 2 years ago?
I don't think that's true. I thank the honourable member for his question, but I don't think that's true at all. The reason for putting it on is so that taxpayers can see that this new tax that they are paying is clearly represented, and if they need reassurance that the support for social care in their own lives, in the lives of their families and their communities is of long standing and will be enduring, they can only look at the tax at their own tax payslips to see what those are.
If it's about social care, why don't we have an exclusive levy relating to social care? Wouldn't that be much clearer and more transparent?
Well, of course, the honourable member invites us to think of social care as a completely separate thing. But of course, there's a tremendous overlap between social care and some aspects of health. And it's important to make sure that the system, which I think all members realise is too disjointed, is more joined up. And therefore, this treatment appears to be more appropriate to what is ultimately an area where we want to see more integration. I'm actually going to make a bit more progress, if I may. The Honourable Gentleman hasn't featured in the debate so far, so if I may, I'll let him make a bit more progress, and then I'll take his intervention happily. Amendment 7, if I may turn to Amendment 7, Mr. Chairman. This is the amendment tabled by my honourable friend, the member for Yeovil. It seeks to ensure that the proceeds from the levy can be used in any tax year. As the House will be aware, the levy is designed to mirror the approach of the national insurance system. That has always operated on a pay-as-you-go basis. Indeed, that's been the case since the NHS and the National Insurance Fund were established in 1948. This means that NICs collected in 1 year are used to pay for the NHS and contributory benefits paid out in the same year. The pay-as-you-go basis provides a clear precedent for how the levy should operate, and that also ensures simplicity and consistency across the NIC system. And I hope the honourable member will withdraw his amendment for the reasons that I have outlined. Happy to take the intervention, General.
Minister, for giving way. Perhaps on the point that was made by his honourable friend behind him, one of the reasons why you've used the term health and social care is because what you've established here is a principle that you pay at the point of delivery. And as we see health and social care begin to integrate, I think the fear for many of us on this side is that this is a Trojan horse for introducing those payments for healthcare, for the NHS. And I think one of my fears is that when the Prime Minister spoke of this delivering profoundly conservative outcomes, is just such that danger itself.
Well, I think that fear is, it's helpful to have a diagnosis of why Labour members might be opposed or worried to it, but I don't think the fear is entirely without foundation. There's no suggestion that the government wishes to create a system that is anything other than free at the point of delivery, and that is the basis on which the government's always proceeded and proceeds now. And what we are trying to do is to put a longer-term arrangement in place for social care that allows us to bring the same kind of clarity to that people have enjoyed for many years with the NHS. Madam.
I thank the Minister for giving way. If it's the case that the government believes in a social care system that is free at the point of use, why isn't it delivering a social care system like that, like the NHS, which is universal and available to everyone?
I don't know if the Honourable Lady heard, I was talking about the NHS, and that's been a founding principle of the NHS and one that the Conservative Party has always adhered to, and rightly so. What we are doing with the levy, obviously, is funding an expansion and a development of an existing set of arrangements, and as I've discussed in relation to member for Gainsborough's question, the potential to expand that through the use of other mechanisms of support now that these catastrophic risks have been removed or will be removed from people's lives. Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'd like to address the amendments tabled by the SNP in Plaid Cymru that look to require a joint agreement between the Treasury and the governments of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland as to how the levy proceeds are to be shared between the four parts of the UK and between healthcare and social care. In terms of how the levy revenue will be split between the four parts of the UK, this legislation mirrors existing legislation on how NHS allocation is divided between England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. It's right, I think, and appropriate that we should follow that established precedent. The government will work closely with the devolved administrations on the implementation of the levy, of course, including on the process for allocating revenues across the UK and on the split between health and social care from April 2023 onwards. I think it's also worth bearing in mind that the devolved administration's overall funding will continue to be determined by the Barnett formula, so that this process will just determine the element that's provided by the levy, and I hope that honourable members will withdraw their amendments for the reasons I've outlined. Of course.
I don't know if you've read the note from the Hansard Society on this, but they are concerned by some of the implications for the devolution settlement, and they point out that there's no requirement in the bill for the Treasury or the Health Secretary to consult the devolved administration about any aspect of this process. Is that not a cause for concern?
The Treasury already consults the devolved administrations very closely on many aspects of tax policy, and there's no reason to think, and the bill doesn't suggest, that there should be any other reason for handling. On the contrary, following the existing hypothecation gives direct support to devolved administrations that they will be able to receive the union dividend which is generated and delivered by this policy. Mr. Chairman, Clause 2 creates a legally binding obligation to use the funds raised by this levy for the purposes of health and social care. It sets out that HMRC will direct funds to the Secretary of State to be used for the cost of health and social care in England, in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. The funds from the levy will be shared between healthcare and social care and will be shared between each nation in proportion determined by the Treasury. Treasury's used the long-standing Barnett formula to fund devolved administrations and will continue to do so for the proceeds of this measure. Clause 2 goes further and ensures that any interest or penalties that can be attributed to the levy will also be used to fund health and social care. However, any expenses incurred by HMRC in collecting the levy will be deducted from the proceeds, and that ensures that HMRC have the ability to collect and police this levy properly. I therefore beg to move that Clause 2 stand part of the bill. Of course.
On Clause 2, in 2014 we passed the Care Act and accepted the Dilnot proposals. 2 years later, slightly less, we canned the central part of the Dilnot proposals in that it was decided that local government should in fact have the social care uplift that had been anticipated in 2014. What certainty do we have that the measures we're passing through the House today will not be dealt with in a similar way if in 2 or 3 years' time we find that the pressures on local government are so acute, which they might well be, that we have to can some of the measures that we've been discussing earlier today?
I thank the Honourable for his question. I think the point is perfectly clear. This is intended to be and will be a long-term permanent funding arrangement to support health and social care, and it actually includes, the settlement, as the plan demonstrates, a component that is designed to support local government in the delivery of this and not to distort markets that are already in existence. So there's no reason to think, and we do not anticipate, that there will be any specific issue relating to this that is not something that can be addressed at the time. But the commitment to put this on a longer term funding settlement that actually can be reviewed and considered by individuals when they pay their NICs, and to do so in a way that gives them comfort that that same settlement will be in place, as it were, similarly to the state's pension system, and therefore they can plan against it, is, I think, manifest, and the government has made that very clear. If I may, Mr. Chairman, Clause 3 specifies that any provisions that apply to a qualifying national insurance contribution are to apply to equivalent payments of the health and social care levy. The clause also sets out limitations to these provisions applying to the levy. Clause 4 provides for regulations for the purposes of the health and social care levy to be made under the bill and specifies the parliamentary procedure that will apply to those regulations. Clause 5 sets out the transitional arrangements for the measure, specifies that they will only apply for the 2022-23 tax year. The effect of this clause is that there will be a temporary increase in the rates of Class 1, 1A, 1B and Class 4 NICs by 1.25% for 1 year. There will be a corresponding temporary increase in the amount of contributions allocated to the NHS by the same amount. Clause 6 defines various terms used in the bill. Clause 7 specifies the short title of the Act as the Health and Social Care Levy Act 2021 and states that the levy is payable by or in relation to employees of the Crown. I beg to move that these clauses stand part of the bill. If I may, I now turn to the proposed new clauses 1 to 5 tabled by Labour and the SNP. These ask the government to review and report on the impact of revenue effects of the levy, the impact of the levy on business, and analysis of the equality impact of the levy. If I may, I'd like to explain why I believe these clauses are unnecessary. The government has already provided a number of assessments of the impact of the levy. They include a distributional analysis of the impact of the combined tax and spending announcements. This shows that lower income households will be large net beneficiaries from this package, with the poorest households gaining most as a proportion of income. And it also shows that the 20% of highest income households will contribute more than 40 times that of the 20% of lowest income households. A technical annex in the government's plan for health and social care is a further assessment. That sets out the impact on the exchequer, on individuals and on businesses, and shows that 70% of the money raised from businesses will come from the largest 1% of businesses, while 40% of all businesses will pay nothing extra. The tax information impact note is a third form of assessment. This sets out the equalities impact of the levy specifically, rather than the overall package of measures. Going forward, yes, of course.
As well as businesses, this will have a large effect on public services, on their bills. For instance, West Yorkshire Police are looking at an extra £3 million in paying national insurance. Leeds City Council, again, in the region of £3 million for directly employed services. And somewhat ironically, many of the social care services the council use are outsourced, so they will also push up the cost of those services because of the NICs. What assessment has he done on the effect on local government and on the police?
Well, the plan is clear that to the extent there are national insurance contributions that are incurred by public bodies, they will be met, and the funding is set up on that basis. In relation to local government, these are matters to be extra pressures other than those already contemplated are matters for discussion in the spending review, and that is the normal fiscal procedure and the one that the government's following. If I may continue, going forward, a full costing will set out the budget and certified by the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility. As is the case for tax policy, the health and social care levy will be continuously kept under review using information collected from internal systems, national insurance and levy receipts. I hope that honourable members will withdraw their amendments for the reasons I've indicated. If I may turn now to address the amendments of the opposition on reporting the levy expenditure shares and the revenue derived from those in the social care sector. First, on the share of levy spent on health and social care, the government already routinely publishes data on departmental spending throughout the year, including at main and supplementary estimates, through public expenditure, statistical analyses, and in departmental annual reports and accounts, as well as data on the revenue raised from individual taxes. At present, this reporting shows, for example, exactly how much revenue NHS England receives from national insurance contributions. In future, this will show the contribution this levy makes to the budgets of the Department of Health and Social Care and the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. There is no need for additional reporting in that context, since all the relevant information will already be publicly available. The Government has already published the amounts that will go to the NHS and to adult social care over the next 3 years as a result of this levy, and will confirm final allocations at the spending review. Finally, on the levy revenue derived from those in the social care sector, existing data sources do not include or do not reliably collect data on employment by sector. It's not known which sector an individual works in, only their income types and amounts. I hope, given these considerations, that honourable members will withdraw their amendments for the reasons I have outlined. Turning to the amendment tabled by my honourable friend, the member for Amber Valley, this clause would require the Office of Tax Simplification to publish an assessment of the merits of the levy. As outlined in the Finance Act 2016, the statutory role of the OTS is to advise on the simplification of the tax system. To assess fully the advantages and disadvantages of introducing the health and social care levy would require the OTS to consider and comment on choices with far broader policy considerations, including on health and social care, which sit well beyond its remit and expertise. The OTS functions as an advisor to the Chancellor rather than to Parliament, and it is for the Chancellor to commission work for the OTS or for the OTS to advise the Chancellor on its own initiative as it seems appropriate. It's not the role of Parliament to commission work from the OTS, though I have no doubt that the Treasury will have taken on board this amendment, and I thank my honourable member for putting it down. The published tax information and impact note sets out clearly that the operational costs of the levy are being quantified, and the Government will publish these estimates before the measure comes into effect in April 2022.
Grateful to him. Does he have any rough estimate he could give us of the cost to business of having to comply with the rules of paying a third payroll tax in effect? Does he have any idea how much all the changes to software to include that levy will be, and all the costs of redesigning pay slips, all those costs that will have to be borne? Does he have any estimate for us before we decide whether we want a new tax or just to increase national insurance as we're doing for the first year?
Well, it is of course true that business, just in relation to the levy, will bear some cost, and the existing tax inflation impact note outlines that there will be costs to be borne, as one would expect with any tax, let alone a broad-based tax of this kind. The Government, of course, the package goes well beyond this, and businesses will be large beneficiaries in many ways from aspects of the package, because they will benefit from having a healthier and more secure workforce than they have otherwise. So how one would measure that, I'm not entirely clear, but I take the point he makes, and I, of course, will refer it to colleagues. Having said that, I hope the honourable will withdraw the amendment for the reasons I've outlined, and I beg to move.
I'd just like to get an indication as